as Facebook is increasingly struggling to answer criticism in this country over how its platform was used in the Russian attack on our election last year and why the company hasn't been more helpful to investigators trying to get to the bottom of that attack and trying to figure out if Americans helped in that attack. Daily Beast reports today that Facebook has been in this battle space before, also involving the Russians. At the same time Russian troops were invading Ukraine to take Crimea in 2014, Russian information warfare operators were using a surprisingly effective technique on Facebook to clear Ukrainian voices off of social media. So the Russians wouldn't have any competition for the information space while it was invading that neighboring country. What these Russian operatives would do is they'd find Ukrainian activists, people arguing in favor of Ukraine in this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and then they'd go to online Facebook posts by those people, and then they would click report on those posts. And whatever that person's argument was, whatever the picture was, whatever the thing was that person was sharing, these Russian operatives would swarm it and report it over and over again to Facebook as porn. Or they'd report it as, inappropriate nudity or some other thing that you can flag to Facebook as a reason that a post should be taken down. It's like kind of the online equivalent of swatting, right? Where you call in the SWAT team. You call the police about your neighbor, you say some terrible crime is being committed, even though nothing's really going on, and then the police respond and your neighbor has to deal with this, annoying and expensive and potentially dangerous police response, right? It's one thing if you do that as a nuisance, you do that as a one-off effort to harass somebody or to play a prank. But when you do it systematically as a state-sponsored tactic of warfare, you get good at it. And you do it in bulk. And in the case of the Russia-Ukraine stuff back in 2014, 2015, it meant they were blowing the whistle to Facebook about these innocuous posts by Ukrainian activists. They were doing it hundreds of times, thousands of times for each post and for each activist, and it worked. It, in fact, became such a point of concern that the president of Ukraine raised the issue with Facebook, asked Facebook to please consider maybe creating an office in Ukraine so they could deal with this special problem they were having here with Russian operatives taking all these Ukrainian voices off of social media. Facebook laughed off that request from Ukraine and their president. But the Daily Beast today went back and interviewed some of the activists from Ukraine who were shut up by Facebook when all this was happening because Russian operatives targeted them to be shut up. I mean, around the time that Russian troops were literally invading Ukraine and taking over part of that country, Facebook was helping those the Russian government shut down opposition voices from the country they were invading. One of those activists tells the Daily Beast today that what he posted online in one instance was, quote, a picture of my city with a picture of a rainbow over it, and the picture said, everything will be okay. That's what he posted. Russian operatives swarmed that and reported it over and over and over and over and over again as porn, and that activist was blocked from Facebook for a month while Russia invaded his country.
So, Mark, this question comes from Israel, but is about Ukraine. Not to get confusing. So it actually had 45,000 likes on your profile. So it's from Gregory, and he says, Mark, I see many reports of unfair Facebook account blocking, probably as a result of massive fake abuse reports. These often involve the Facebook accounts of many top pro-Ukrainian bloggers and posts about the current Russian-Ukrainian conflict. My question is, can you or your team please do something to resolve this problem? Maybe create a separate administration for the Ukrainian segment, block abuse reports from Russia, or just monitor the top Ukrainian bloggers more carefully. Help us, please. And as a follow-up to this, and we'll show this on the screen, the Ukrainian president, Petro Poroshenko, actually sent in a question as well. And he asks, Mark, will you establish a Facebook office in Ukraine?
Hi.
It's a mouthful.
All right, well, let's get into it. So 45,000 votes for that question is I think makes it by far the most voted on question that we've ever had at one of these Q&As. So I did some research before this to make sure that I had the right answer to this one. There were a few different parts of the question. One was about content moderation and some specific types of content that have been taken down that some Ukrainian folks have posted. The second part of it is about how we do moderation and overall kind of what our approach is to that. And then the third, which Ukrainian president has written in on, is will we open up an office in Ukraine? So I'll go through each of those. For the first, there's been a bunch of content that has been posted that violates the rules that we have around hate speech, right? So we don't allow people to post content on Facebook that is overtly hateful towards another group, that has ethnic slurs, that tries to incite violence towards an ethnic group or anything like that. And unfortunately, there were a few posts that folks were posting that kind of tripped that rule. And other folks in our community reported that in, and we looked at those, and we made the determination that some of these posts included these ethnic slurs against some Russian folks, and we took down those posts. And I looked into this personally because this question had 45,000 votes on it, so I wanted to make sure that I understood what I was talking about before we got up here. And I stand by that. I think we did the right thing according to our policies in taking down those posts. And I agree with the policies that we have around not supporting hate speech. I think that is a good set of rules that we have on the system. Now, there were a couple of questions that folks were asking about, were these posts by Ukrainians moderated by Russians, where there's the ongoing conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And there was this meme that was floating around that this policy and the content moderation was done out of a Russian office by Russians who were anti-Ukrainian. And that's not true. So first of all, we don't actually have a Russian office. So anyone who thinks that this was done out of a Russian office, that should probably put that to rest. We also don't have a Ukrainian office, and we actually don't have offices in a lot of countries around the world, but maybe over time. And what we try to do is when people write in and report content, we try to have folks who speak that language review it. And we have a European headquarters in Dublin, where we have folks who speak a lot of different languages from around the world, look at the different content, and that's what we did here. Now, we did make one mistake, which was when we reached out to some of the folks to tell them about the content that we'd taken down, there was a bug in our system where we accidentally told folks that we were taking it down because the post contained nudity instead of hate speech. So that was a mistake, and we are there was a bug in the software that we were running. We fixed that. We have reached out and apologized to folks. It's pretty clear if you look at the post that they don't contain nudity, so I understand why that was the source of some confusion, but we'll try not to make that mistake anymore. To the question from the Ukrainian president, and I think a bunch of other people wrote in with this as well, about are we willing to put an office in Ukraine? Over time, it's something that we might consider, right? There are a lot of advantages to having people who work at the company, especially engineers and people who are building products, not spread all around the world, but instead just in a smaller number of offices where people can work more easily together, right? If you always have to video conference or make phone calls to collaborate with people, and you have to work across a lot of different time zones, that puts a big tax on working together and makes it very hard. So there are areas like in sales or partnerships where it does make a lot of sense to have local teams who are working with local partners for things like engineering offices, and which is most of what we do at the company. It really makes sense to kind of try to centralize that in as few centers as possible, which is why we don't have offices in a lot of places around the world. But as we do look to expand over time, we will certainly consider all of these countries. So thank you for the question that 45,000 people voted on, and for the Ukrainian president for writing in. I don't think we've gotten that one before.
Excellent. So,
I mean, as Russia was literally seizing territory from a neighboring country within the last few years, as they became one of the only modern industrialized nations in a generation to have invaded a neighboring country and taken over part of its territory, Russia also simultaneously took to the information space to shut down activists from that country.